We're going to be in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. We're going to be looking at verses 30 through verses 40. Title of the sermon is Completing the Chain. Completing the chain, what does that mean? Let's look at the text. We'll read part of it and then we'll start our exposition of the text. In verse 30 it says, "By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith they conquered kingdoms, they enforced justice, they obtained promises, they stopped the mouths of lions. They quenched the power of fire, they escaped the edge of the sword. They were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in times of war. They put foreign armies to flight." In verse 35, women received back their dead by resurrection. In chapter 11, we have already started it a couple weeks ago, and we recognize it's a list of names that the preacher is using to encourage his church, a church that is discouraged and thinking about quitting the faith altogether. This is a fantastic message. What do you tell somebody who loves God, who's been going to church, and now they feel like quitting, they've lost their excitement about it? We started the list a couple weeks ago. Today we'll complete the list. And he talks about those few specific standout people in the Old Testament who stood out and were unique because of their faith in God. We looked at the word faith, and we want to be able to build up that word, because what exactly does that mean? Their trust in God, their belief in God, their belief in the faithfulness of God. All of those words, their conviction that God is who He says He is and does what He says He does, and that made them unique people, different than all of the other people in their community. How does it make you different? Because it teaches you precepts that transcend material realities. You're able to have a bigger vision. You're able to rise above material realities. Let me just use an example because we went through it. There are a lot of people that after an election series, if the wrong president gets elected, they just collapse and their whole world falls apart. But it doesn't happen if you have faith in God, because you know a transcendent truth that there is somebody that is more powerful in the universe than whoever happens to be president of the United States. Whatever political party happens to be in charge, we know that there is a more powerful God that's actually in charge. And so we don't fret after elections like most people do because of our faith in God. Well, let me take you back. In this final section, verses 30 through 40, he's going to look at a few more names. And one thing that is valuable to us as we go through the names, I believe this final set of names can be broken into 3 categories. You may want to make a note of that. I'm going to break this final group of names into 3 groups that are distinct and unique from the other group. First, I want to draw your attention to a verse in Isaiah chapter 5 that talks about God using very unique, wonderful people to influence their community. God has always done this from the beginning, but the way He explains it in the Old Testament sounds very unique and picturesque. So I would like for us to read this and then take a look at it. Isaiah 5 and verse 1, he says, "My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it up and cleared the stones and planted the finest vines. Put a square around that. That's important. The finest vines. He built a watchtower in the middle and dug out a wine press as well. And then he waited for the vineyard to yield good grapes. But the fruit that it produced was sour. Do you realize that he's talking about faithful men in the midst of Israel? He's using this agricultural, metaphor, analogy, because the people in that day were very familiar with this. This was like telling people about getting in your car and driving to work. You stick the key in the ignition, you pull the handle down, you back up, you put it in drive, you drive. Common everyday stuff for us. For them, this was common everyday stuff. And he described a farmer that goes out, does work, makes important choices about what he's sticking in the ground, right? That's what he calls the finest vines. He made important choices about what you stick in the ground. And then the farmer gets done and he sits back and waits. This year I planted 2 tomato plants and about 6 green bean plants. And it was quick. All you do is stick something in the ground and cover it with dirt. Isn't it funny how easy it is? But then the hard part came. Where is the stuff? I'm not seeing any stuff pop up yet. Right? It takes a long time for stuff to start popping up. And then when green stuff started popping up, that wasn't good enough. Where is the red, round tomatoes? Where is those long, crispy green beans? So you're waiting for this stuff. And when it comes up, he says, oh man, when it came up, I was disappointed with what it was. The tomatoes were horrible and cracked and broken. They didn't look the way I wanted them to look. Probably common stuff. But what he's talking about is people. And what he is calling the choice vines are the faithful people that he planted in the midst of Israel. Abraham, Moses, Elijah, Elisha, those were the good vines. So I put those good vines in the soil. The soil is the community, Israel. I planted these wonderful, faithful people in the midst of a community. And then I expected that community would learn from these wonderful vines, these wonderful examples that I planted in their midst, that they would learn from them and that the people would become like those few faithful examples that I gave for them. And the disappointment is Israel hated the good people. The soil that God put these righteous people in, the soil, the community, hated those righteous people. Didn't like the lessons that those righteous people were teaching. They were antagonistic against the righteous people. They rejected, like the soil rejecting the plant. They rejected those righteous people, and then they ended up bearing bad fruit. What's bad fruit? Behavior. Their behavior was wrong, bad. They fell after idols. They fell into sexual immorality. There was anger. There was lying. There was injustices. There was oppression of helpless people. That's what he's calling the fruit. Their behavior was terrible. I'm so disappointed by that. Now, normally the Bible focuses on the terrible behavior of people and the consequences of their terrible behavior. But today, as we're looking at those names of those fine vines, we're going to focus on the good people, the people that God gave them as examples of what good faith looks like. The expectation, one way maybe we can relate to this, is the expectation is if you hand your children off to a world-class person. I know in my sister's case, she's been handing off my nephews to world-class baseball players. If you hand off your children to world-class athletes, what do you expect? You expect them to turn your children into world-class athletes. When you hand your children over to world-class education, you expect your children to come out of that with a world-class education. We expect it to have an effect. Well, we're going to look at some of the world-class people that God found favor in because of their faithfulness to Him. Let's go to our text today. We're going to start the first group of people. This first group of people, I would say, are people who defied the odds because they were vindicated by God. Everything worked out for the best for this particular little group of people. Their faith helped them defy the odds, and they were vindicated, triumphant in the end. That's going to be verses 30 through 35. Let's start with verse 30. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. We can't spend much time on each of these, but just quickly, faith and the number 7. If you've done much Bible study, you already know what that means. Faith accompanied with the number 7. What does that tell us about people? In the case of Jericho, God says, here's your military strategy. Now understand, military strategy back then was lots of horses, lots of chariots, and lots of devices that you could use to break down the walls of a city. They had battering rams. That was your first job to take over a city, was to send some brave men in and destroy and crumble down the wall so you could penetrate the city. Lots of fascinating machinery in antiquity, bulwarks that they used to tear down walls. But what does God's faithful people use to tear down walls? Walking circles, blowing a trumpet, and then yelling. Has that ever worked before? Here's what it looks like. In the case of Jericho, what they were told to do is 7 days, 6 days, march around the city one time. Day 1, nothing happened. Day 2, nothing happened. Day 4, 5, 6, nothing happened. Day 7, I want you to march around the city again. Yeah, but nothing has been happening. Why are we doing this? It's not working. Oh, okay, well today, instead of marching around the city once, I want you to march around the city 7 times. Well, what's that going to do? Blow a trumpet and yell. Fascinated by that. What does that have to do with faith? You've got to be able to continue doing something that doesn't look like it's working, simply because God said it will work. That's faith. I'm amazed by that. Other ones that He didn't give, Elijah and Ahab. There was a drought that came over the land. There was a famine that came over. People were dying as a result. And Elijah told his servant, go up to the hill, look out at the sea, and do it 7 times. First time he went out and looked at the sea, nothing. 4, 5, 6 times, nothing happened. Is he going to have enough faith to go out and do it the 7th time? On the 7th time, when the young assistant goes up on the hill and looks at the sea, he sees black clouds developing. The heavens grew black with clouds, and a great rain and a great storm came out. He had to continue 7 days. Most of you, when you think of faith and 7, you think of Naaman the leper. Go dip yourself in this gross lake 7 times. He got angry about that. He was convinced to do it, and on the 7th time, he was healed. Ideas of faith that defy logic. Why the dirtiest lake? Why the Yakima? Why not the Columbia? I always feel gross when I get out of the Yakima. You know what I'm talking about. Faith, because that's what God said to do it. That's what God said. Let's go on in our verse. Verse 32. And what more shall I say? Time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. They quenched the power of fire. They escaped the edge of the sword. They were made strong out of weakness. They became mighty in times of war. They put foreign armies to flight, and women received back their dead by resurrection. You'll recognize some of those stories. It might be a challenge for you to remember who were these guys that did these things. Joshua was the one that was able, with much smaller armies, to go in and defeat much larger armies than himself. Why was that? Marty told us this morning in our Old Testament class, because God was the one that was doing the fighting. If Joshua would have presented his military strategy to the powers that be, they would have said, yeah, there is nothing about that looks like it's going to work, Joshua. Yeah, that's fine. I'm fine with that because God told me it will work. God said it will work. I'm fascinated by that. I won't say her name, but I'm familiar with a mother that is with us that prayed for her rebellious son, engaging in all kinds of wickedness for 20 years. She said she prayed every single day. And at some point you might think, well, it's not going to work. After 10 years, would you think maybe it's just not going to work? After 15 years, would you think maybe it's just not going to work? After 20 years, it worked. How does a person keep praying when it looks like it's not working? Because one person had faith that God said, intercede for your children. Daniel was the one fed to lions. Fed to lions. And nothing happened to him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into fire. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, we have faith that our God is going to protect us. Nothing bad's going to happen to us. But, put a square around but. But even if something bad does happen to us, we still have faith in our God. Powerful. Many escaped the edge of the sword. I'm drawn to David. David committed a sin, and then he tried to hide the sin. And God said, David, because you did this, are you familiar with what his punishment was? You are never, ever going to have peace in your own house. You're always going to be afraid for your life, and you're always going to be on the run. You will never see peace in your house, David. Consequences of sin. Did that make David angry at God? David loved God, feared God. God, I love reading your words. Your book here is a lamp to my feet. I wouldn't know how to live my life if it wasn't for you. It's like fresh, cold water to me. I love everything about you, God. That's what it looks like. You've got to live your whole life suffering the consequences of having made a mistake. But through that, I can still exalt God, glorify God, worship God. Because what I've done wrong and what I am suffering has no bearing on who God is and His promises. Verse 32. No, sorry, I gave that to you. Okay. The group that I just gave you were people who were protected, they were given victories, and they were vindicated because of their faith. Group number 2 is verses 35 through 38. Group number 2 is especially impactful on me, and you're going to see why. Let me give you a quote before we look at these people. So far, we've been reminded of stories of earthly achievement and earthly survival in the face of death. But now, a different perspective takes over. That of the people of faith who were not vindicated in this life, and for whom faith did not mean they escaped suffering and death. Let's go ahead and read the text, and then we'll comment on it. Starting at verse 35. Here's group 2. These people got tortured, and they refused to accept being released so that they could rise again to a better life. Other people suffered mocking and floggings, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in the skins of sheep and goats. They were destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered about in the deserts and in the mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. That's a powerful section to me, because there are many, many churches today that, in the interest of filling the building, only promise good stuff and blessings to visitors. You're going to be healthy. You're going to be wealthy. You're going to get all of your dreams come true. You're going to live your best life now. You know the famous guy that says that? He wrote a book, This is Your Best Life Right Now. But the Scripture is always fair in saying, yeah, some good things happen to some faithful people. But the whole book of Ecclesiastes, the author of Ecclesiastes is scratching his head. What I don't understand, he says, is why sometimes bad things happen to good people. Why is there this inequity in life? Why is there this unfairness in life? You look at one of the Rolling Stones guys. You know who I'm talking about? Keith Richards. I don't remember which one's the singer or the guitar player. Those guys are in their 80s. They have engaged in debauchery, drugs, alcohol. And those guys are still alive and kicking and having a good time. And yet there's been some faithful, righteous, God-loving people get struck with a disease, have an early death, suffer a lot of their life. There are inequities. There are things that don't make sense in life. And he says he's not afraid to hide it from us. These are people who were on the other side. This is group number 2. People who also had faith in God. People who also loved God. And yet, in this life, they experienced the worst of the worst. He says they were able to do it because they were faithful that someday they would be resurrected. That this life was not the end and all there was. They knew that there would be a resurrection, and that resurrection would be the beginning of their good life. Can you look through this list and go, boy, I don't know. I hope I could do that if it ever came. We have been extremely fortunate and extremely lucky, haven't we? We've been able to have our faith in God. We've had good lives. Most of us have a heated and air-conditioned place where we reside, a nice, comfortable place to sleep. And if we open the refrigerator, we probably have food enough for today. We are richer than some of the greatest kings that ever lived historically. We're richer than them. But these are people that had such faith in God, they were able to say, God, this is what I would like. God, this is the way I want it. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. Habakkuk said, God, I wish you would come in here and fix our government because these governors, these district attorneys, these prosecutors, my city council is terrible and horrible. Wish you would do something about it. And at the end, Habakkuk says, you know what? Even if God doesn't do something about it, even if I have to live my life with a bad city council, bad city prosecutors, bad mayors, bad governors, even if there's no cattle in the stall and no grapes on the vine, even if my lot happens to be a bad generation, I still will rejoice in the Lord. You're still going to be my rock. I'm still going to be faithful to you. Jesus told Peter, hey, Peter, things are getting really tough. Would you like to leave? Be easier if you just left right now. Peter said, no way, because where else would I go? You're the Son of the living God. You're the resurrection. You're eternal life. Where else could I go? Thy will be done. I think in the sermon, just quickly for some of you Bible teachers and preachers, notice what he's done. In chapter 11, he uses specific examples and then exposits the example. But then as he builds up the number of people, then he starts just rattling off names real quick, right? In a sense, that's where his sermon is starting to pick up. I've already kind of slowly woken you up. Now I'm just going to pick you up. And now I think he throws in something to jar his audience awake. Something that kind of breaks the flow of the sermon. Let's look at this. Verse 39. You may want to put a circle around 39, around that verse number, and make a little note for yourself. Boy, this is an interruption in the flow of the sermon. Bible teachers and preachers would want to say, what's this interruption here for? Let's look at it. Verse 39. And yet all of these, even though they were commended through their faith, they didn't receive what was promised to them. Now, I don't know about you, but he better come up with a better way to end the sermon, because you don't tell a church full of people, here, be faithful, be faithful, be faithful no matter what, and, oh man, they didn't get anything. It didn't work out. They didn't receive anything that they were supposed to receive. That's not the way you want to end a sermon. And that's not the way he's going to end this sermon. The end doesn't come until chapter 12, guys, so we're not going to get it today. But look at what he says. They didn't get any of the promises. That is anticlimactic. He was building up to a crescendo, building up where all the guys with the cymbals are supposed to go, psh, and there's a big climactic. And what he says is they didn't get anything for their trouble. That's not what you would expect. And so the audience is going to be dumbfounded. It's going to give you a cognitive dissonance, and that's probably what he wants. He wants his audience to stop and go, what? What's the moral of the story then? What's the point then? People are left saying, well, that's not fair. I don't know if it's worth it, if that's the way everything is going to end up. And I think that in his sermon, he probably paused for a little while people had a frown on their little scowl on their forehead. And then he gives them the news. Verse 40. This is now the third group of people. And this, they could have never seen this coming. Verse 40. Because God wanted something better for us. So that apart from us, they could not be made perfect. I'm fascinated by that. Let's unpack that to make sure we understand. I suggested at the beginning of chapter 11 that for these people that are getting discouraged and their knees are beginning to buckle, they're starting to cry uncle and thinking maybe it's not worth it. What he did in the beginning of his sermon in chapter 11 is he says, hey, look back at all of the people that we respect. And I told you it was like jerseys in a basketball stadium that are up in the rafters. Jordan and O'Neal and whoever, those are the only two guys, but look at those awesome guys of the past. He's not, and I thought he was going to say, let's emulate those guys. And do you notice what he does? He says, none of those jerseys got the good stuff, got the best stuff, because God had reserved the best stuff for you. He's telling his first century audience, 64 AD, people that were exhibiting faith after the Messiah had come. After the Son of God had come, given a new covenant, a new promises, a new high priest that doesn't serve in the temple in Jerusalem, a new high priest that is serving in heaven right in front of God. You guys are the beneficiaries of a new era, a new age. All of the guys that I've showed you so far were before the Messiah ever showed up. And they were glorious and they were righteous and they were faithful, and there's a place in history for them, but their place in history is not as good as your place in history. Because you've been taught about the Messiah. You've seen the fulfillment of everything. And that's the point. He's saying, yes, they were part of the plan, they were part of the game, but they were only the first half of the game. You guys are the ones that actually get to receive the baton from those guys, but you guys get to go to the finish line. You guys get to see the completion of the race. You get to run the best part of the race. I hope that there's some way to make that real to yourself. That first century Greco-Roman audience, 64 AD, and by extension, we're part of them, aren't we? We are living the same blessed reality that they got to live. And he says, you guys are the ones that finish the race. You guys are the ones that get better promises than what they had. God is always full of surprises. In God's eschatology, you should be grateful that you fall on the timeline after Jesus and not the timeline before Jesus. Under the Torah, under the law, under the temple. Those guys were great, he says. But the guys that fall on the timeline after the Messiah, they are the ones that have it better. So not only are you looking at the rafters at these old jerseys that are up there, but you are destined to be up there, and the part of the game that you get to play is much, much better than the part of the game that they got to play. Just let me put a pin in the sermon right there. Put a pin in the sermon right there. I'm deviating, but I just had a rock climbing idea. You take, I forgot the guy's name. Mallory, I think was the guy's name. The first guy to ever climb Mount Everest. Hillary? Edmund Hillary. Thank you. Edmund Hillary. You should go to Google and try to find a picture of Edmund Hillary. He climbed Everest with horrible, horrible boots. He climbed Everest with horrible, horrible ropes. Heavy, those ropes that can, with hair sticking out, and you could cut your hand on those things. Big, heavy wool jackets and blankets. And I'm picturing he climbed Everest under the most horrible of conditions. But fast forward to how people today climb Everest, the best in warm, battery-powered, insulated boots. The best guides. The path has already been made for you. He had to make his own. Big, puffy, goose down jackets that don't weigh anything at all and keep you warm the whole way. Navigation systems, GPS, canned oxygen that they get to strap on their face. Are you beginning to see the picture? The guys that climbed Everest way back in the old days had it bad. The guys that are doing the same work today have it made. And that was an example that I just popped into my head. That's the example he's giving. Boy, the guys that tried to be faithful to God under Torah, they are worthy of our respect. But the guys that are faithful to Jesus, Messiah, Son of God, we have it so much better than they did. Something better. Okay, I want to give you 7 of these aspects of how it is better, because this word better in our text today, verse 40, provided something better. I'd put a square around the word better, because you may have forgotten, but all through the chapters of Hebrews 1 through 10, he's been using this word better the whole time, and we've probably just forgotten about it. So I want to highlight some of these ideas of better that he's already told us about. The first one is we get a ministry that is better than the ministry that the angels delivered. He says angels delivered the Torah to Moses. We get something better than that. The Son of God Himself delivered our ministry. Something better, he said. That was in chapter 1. Number 2, we get a better priest and a better hope. Remember, he said their priests were flawed, sinful men, and they died and they had to be replaced. Our priest is perfect. He is ascended up to heaven and he never dies. So we don't ever have to deal with getting a new pope because the last one died. We don't ever have to worry about having a new priest because the last one died, because our high priest, our pope, lives in heaven, never dies, always reigns. Look at what he said. This is in chapter 7, Hebrews chapter 7, verse 17. It is witnessed of him, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. For on the one hand, a former command has been set aside because of its weakness and uselessness. Can you imagine persevering in faith under a system that was weak and useless? Verse 19. For the law made nothing perfect, but on the other hand, a better hope is introduced through which we can draw near to God. He said in our prayer, we get to go straight into the heavenly places to appear before God. What did they have to do? Go back to Jerusalem. God is in Jerusalem, in the temple. You got to travel there if you want to see Him. We have something much better. Number 3, we have a better covenant. Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 22. This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. Covenant means promise to the people. Jeremiah promised that one day God would make a new covenant with the people. It won't be like the old covenant where something was just written on stone. The new covenant is going to be inside of you, in your heart and in your mind. Everybody's going to know about God, and He will move you through His Spirit to be faithful to Him. You have something they didn't have. You have something better. Number 4, better promises. This is going to be Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 6. As it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is as much more excellent as the old, as the covenant that He mediates is better, because it's enacted on better promises. Are you beginning to feel grateful for being born in the age that you were born in, the Messianic age, and not that Mosaic age? I am. I'm being encouraged. Number 6, we have better sacrifices than they did. This is in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 23. Thus it was necessary that the copies of heavenly things, that was the temple and the tabernacle, the copies had to be purified. But the heavenly realities themselves needed better sacrifices. Verse 24. Because Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are just a copy of the true thing, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. We are living in the age of the reality of the heavenly things, not in the age of types and shadows of heavenly things. Number 7, Hebrews chapter 10, he said, but like them, we too sometimes undergo public humiliation. We too, like them, sometimes get put in prison. If you haven't been following what's happening in the UK, in England, or Britain, I don't know which one the UK is, but if you haven't been following, 33 Christians per day are getting put in prison because of what they post on Facebook. If you post something optimistic, if you post something transcendent, if you post something righteous, and it looks like you're using that to say that what the government is doing is wrong, that what the gay population is doing is wrong, if you look like you're being adversarial, they come to your house and put you in jail, and that's happening today. Paul said you should be grateful that you haven't yet resisted to the point of shedding your own blood. Oh, you should be grateful. That's a great thing to pray to God, exalt God, glorify God for His mercy on us so far. Paul, in this last verses 39 and 40, you may put a little parentheses around 39 and 40 because we've built into something fascinating and powerful and useful. But 39 and 40 are what we call a segue. A segue. A segue into chapter 12, which is where he's going to really deliver the punch. And the segue is he's already created something that looks like faith eschatologically on God's timeline is like what do we call the 440 in track? A relay? 440 in track. You've got 4 men that run the 440 in track. One guy runs part of it, and then he hands a baton to somebody else. And then they run part of it, and they hand off the baton, and the third guy hands off the baton, and it's the fourth guy that actually gets to finish the race. Paul has just made our faith journey look like a relay race. Look at these great examples of faith in the old days, right? And he's now brought his audience into the image. And he says, but now you guys are the last leg of the race of faith. Now the baton is yours, and you're the lucky ones because you get to finish your journey of faith in the best possible time with better promises, a better high priest. Everything is better for you guys. I got to just put a pin right there. It feels like a bad place to stop, huh? We got to stop right there. Because he uses that to segue to chapter 12, and we'll look at the punch that he delivers next week when we get to chapter 12. God bless you guys. I hope you've been encouraged. Run the race. Be faithful. Be transcendent. Understand that the power that we serve in heavenly places is greater than any power on earth. As a child, I remember a TV evangelist, and the song that opened his TV evangelism was, "Greater is He who is in me than he that is in the world."